Good afternoon and welcome to CSBA's webinar, Safety First, Expert Tips for Supporting Effective School Safety Plans and Student Mental Health. My name is Mary Briggs. I'm the Senior Director at CSBA in the Research and Education Policy Development Department, and I want to welcome you to our conversation today. Every day we hear from members about the importance of school safety. And we know that board members and other school leaders feel strongly about protecting students and staff in today's environment, but we also know that it can be very overwhelming at times. If you're watching today, I know that you take this responsibility to heart, and we are really looking forward to the conversation with our panel today. In part of CSBA's response to the concerns and questions we received from our members, we have developed an internal work group that is working across departments to align our resources. And one aspect of the resources that we're developing is providing opportunities to hear from leaders in the field about the ways that governance teams can support school safety efforts. And we know that the phrase school safety covers a broad range of issues, and we understand that there is no way that we can cover all the possible aspects of school safety in depth within a 90-minute webinar. But we have decided to focus on three main areas today that we think are really relevant to the role that you play. And we hope that these will be useful aspects of the conversation, the start of the work that we are doing. So today's presentation will focus on three main areas. We'll begin by understanding the fundamentals of comprehensive school safety planning and how to make the most of the process so that the plans are useful and more than just a compliance document. We also are going to hear local perspectives about key practices in safety planning, one district's use of quarterly school safety summits, threat assessments, and the prevention of active shooter incidents. And finally, we are going to touch on an important and integral aspect of school safety related to mental health, both in terms of the prevention of school violence across a range of things, including interpersonal violence, but also the impact that events might have on students and staff, what that looks like, and how school governance teams can respond. So we're looking forward to this conversation. We are bringing together a panel of phenomenal people today. And in fact, we just had an opportunity to introduce ourselves, and I'm very pleased to see the breadth of expertise that they are bringing. First, Dr. Erika Felix is a professor at UC Santa Barbara. She will be addressing the mental health component of our conversation. Dr. Darshana Patel is the president of the Board of Trustees at Poway Unified School District. We're also welcoming Chief Joseph Paulino, Chief of the San Bernardino USD Police Department, and Dr. Tom Herman from the California Department of Education. So we'll begin, I think, by welcoming Dr. Herman to talk about the components of the school safety plan. We know that for some of you on this call, you've been through this process before. So this may be familiar territory, but beyond the requirements, we're going to be talking today about some of the principles for making the most of the safety planning process. So Tom, just to briefly introduce yourself and mention a little bit about the work that you do at CDE.
Sure, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Tom Herman. I'm the administrator of the School Health and Safety Office. It's within the Whole Child Division at the California Department of Education. And within that office, we deal with issues of mental health, school safety, bullying prevention, drug alcohol prevention, social emotional learning, and grants that deal with the improvement of well-being among students in schools. Also, the California Healthy Kids Survey, from which we're getting great data these years.
Great, thank you. So let's begin with the fundamentals, because I know that you feel passionately about the fundamentals, but actually I want to step back and pause for a moment, because I just realized we didn't quite hit some of the housekeeping details. So I want to point out for folks that we have a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen below the speaker. That's where you can submit questions for either the panel to answer in writing or to answer live. All attendees will receive a link to the video of this webinar. Because we have structured today's webinar to be mostly conversational, we will not have a slide deck that accompanies this, but with the email that you receive, you'll receive a list of resources that we'll be referencing during today's conversation. So back to you, Tom. Want to touch base really briefly on understanding what is the comprehensive school safety plan.
Well, sure. To orient folks in terms of the California Education Code, it appears in section 32280 through 32289. And in that code, it defines what a comprehensive plan is. It's essentially the comprehensive school safety plan is both a document and a strategy that responds to and prevents threats to school safety, including crime and violence. So quite simply, it's an existing document that you must have, but it is also more than that. It is a strategy, and it is should represent systemic efforts to improve school safety, items which I'll talk about.
And so what are some key components of the plan? Because I know it's a very large document. And I know we talked about, if you had presented slides, we would have had multiple slides with like size 6 font, trying to capture all of the components. But what are some of the big items that people should be aware of?
Sure. So it's sort of divided up into those required elements and then those elements which are suggested, which are encouraged by both us and the legislature. But the required elements begin with a sort of a understanding of the current state of crime and violence in your school and community. And that's a required element. And then we have things that you might expect, the issue of child abuse reporting, disaster procedures, earthquake, response to earthquakes, and so conducting drills, and including a dress code actually on campuses, school discipline, including suspension and expulsion, safe ingress and egress if there are emergencies at school, and as well as looking at the issue of active shooter, active surveillant, active assailant or active shooter. So in other words, what are the plans that you have in place to respond should that happen at your school site?
Could you talk a little bit about who's involved in the development of comprehensive safety plans?
Sure. So each school site, they're developed first at the school site, and the requirements of that committee would be the principal or principal's designee, a teacher who's a representative of a certificated employee organization, a classified person who's also a member of the represented organization, at least one parent of a child who attends the school, and other members if desired. So what I read is just simply the bare minimum. What will occur, has to occur after you get this committee together to look at your school safety plan. You must consult with law enforcement, for other first responders, fire department. And so you really have to actively engage with first responders should there be an incident on campus, such as, of course, active shooter, active, the active assailant. So you have to meet with that group to form the committee, to write the plan. We publish, it's mandated that we do on our website, we have a checklist for school safety plans. It's very thorough, and you can download that. And it's really meant to be not something as a sort of a checkoff sheet, though it can be that. It's helpful in that regard, but it's really meant as a reminder to what should be happening in a school safety plan, and how schools can sort of attend to all of the needs of their students, so that they can prevent both acts of violence and bullying, harassment. I didn't mention, I started mentioning the required elements, and I think that it's a good time perhaps now to talk about the elements that are encouraged, and that is bullying prevention, guidelines for the roles of mental health workers and others on campus should there be an emergency, and also it's required that districts have a suicide prevention policy, for example. We recommend that policy be placed in the school safety plan as well. So it reminds people that they have to, attend to the needs of their students who are having mental health issues and struggling.
Great, I appreciate that. How often must districts review and submit their school safety plans, and what are the deadlines associated with that?
Sure. So they need to review their plans as often as they need to. So we just start with that. Things change, but they're required to at least review their plans once yearly, and they should approve and adopt the plan by March 1st. There's been some confusion about this in the field because there are two dates listed. There's another date listed of October 15th. And if by October, the safety plans have not been turned into their district, and I have to be clear about this, they're not turned into us, they're not turned into the CD. We don't approve safety plans, but rather they're approved by their own district. So they turn in these plans, and if by October 15th, the superintendent, whether it be the county superintendent or the superintendent of the LEA, if they've not received the plans, then they must by law report to us that they've not received those plans. And so there's a sort of a space between the March deadline and the October reporting deadline that they would have to they would have to tell us that they've not received safety plans from these various schools.
But the site needs to approve and adopt the plans and present them to the district by March 1st. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And then one other element I think sometimes goes unnoticed, as we've seen in audits, at the site level, the public should be invited to a discussion regarding the school safety plan when they are approving it. And this is a great opportunity for schools to reach out to community members, to talk to parents about what's involved in a school safety plan.
So that makes me think of school board members and governance teams as a whole, and their role in working in community engagement and partnering with their communities. What do you think of the role as the governance team in relation to school safety plans?
Yeah, I think it's one of really being in a great position to remind the superintendents of the due dates, but to have discussions often with their principals of their various sites to talk about what are we doing in the area of school safety, and to look at, for example, priority 6 of the local control accountability plan, to look at school climate, to look at their suspension expulsion rates, to look at the survey which they are required to give their students, which really explore the sort of dive into the affective world of the student. That is, do you perceive this place to be safe Do you feel like you're treated equitably by both other students and staff? And do you feel engaged in school? Do you feel like you have a voice in school? And so these are essential questions to ask. And sometimes the questions are asked, but the data coming from it can be lacking. There can be a sort of a gap there. And so I think the school board members are in a great position to talk to site principals about what are they doing with the results of the survey that they're giving, and how are they attempting to improve school climate, whether it be through programs such as positive behavioral intervention supports, or MTSS, or social emotional learning, those sorts of sort of foundational, what we would call tier 1 work.
Great. So what I hear from you is really the idea that comprehensive school safety plans shouldn't be just a binder on a shelf that gathers dust, except for in a moment of crisis, but that it's something that can be integrated into other aspects of planning and work in the district. So I heard you mention the LCAP as a particularly powerful way to kind of align some of those efforts. Beyond the legal requirements, what else should governance teams know about how to make the most of the planning process?
I think sort of drawing a connection between their elements of professional development in their schools, to look at what is happening with the professional development of teachers. What is a link, for example, between treating students fairly and allowing them to have a voice, and that link between that and school safety. So we know that students who act out, who present sometimes grave threats to schools, have had a history of being disenfranchised, of disengaged, and not being involved at all, neither at times with their own families, nor unfortunately with the school they attend. So there are things that can be put in place that can where schools can attend to those students who are expressing their needs that aren't being met at school sites. I think that can be an essential component of school safety, and one in which the school boards can remind their various sites and their superintendent, of course, to engage in that kind of work.
I appreciate that perspective. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we transition to some of the local perspectives that we're going to hear on the panel?
No, I think that's good for the moment. I'm sure I'll think of a couple of other things I would have liked to have mentioned, but we'll see. Perhaps that will come up in the questions. So thank you.
It's fantastic. I appreciate that. So we've heard a little bit this morning from Dr. Herman that there is a role that governance boards have in this process beyond just the presentation to the district. So one thing that we didn't necessarily touch upon is that the site develops these plans. The language in the law is not really specific when they say it needs to be presented to the district, whether it needs to be presented to the board or the superintendent. My understanding is that most present it to the board, but the law isn't really specific on that point. But beyond that process, we want to think about what that looks like in action. And so today we've brought a couple of people who can speak to that. And we'll start with Dr. Darshana Patel. She is the board president at Poway Unified School District. And I just want to welcome you. Do you want to talk a little bit about Poway so that people have a little bit of context for your district?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Mary, for hosting this panel, and for CSBA for bringing us all together for this very important and always very timely topic. Poway Unified School District is a large, comprehensive school district in San Diego. We are comprised of 3 different municipalities. So we're the city of San Diego, the city of Poway, as well as county unincorporated. So we do deal with multiple different types of law enforcement agencies as well. It makes our planning a little bit more complicated, but we are a well-structured, well-organized team, and we do what we do very, very well. I'm happy to be here to represent Poway Unified, and I'm also the president of the San Diego County School Boards Association. So I work with other districts throughout the region of San Diego on various needs, and we work with a collective voice to make sure our needs are met. Poway Unified School District has over 35,000 students in TK through 12, plus preschool programs and adult ed all the way through.
Right. Well, we just heard from Dr. Herman about the importance of making comprehensive safety school plan development more than just about compliance. Could you talk to us a little bit about Poway and how the district has approached their planning process?
For sure. So in Poway Unified, we definitely see it as a whole comprehensive approach. It's not just what happens on our school sites with our physical safety, like fencing and security cameras. It really is everything from our perimeter, keeping our perimeter secure, our visitor management system, to what we're doing with social emotional learning in the classroom, as well as staff training with anti-bias training that we do in our professional growth. So it really is fully comprehensive. We also bring our community in. So for example, we work with the County Office of Education in securing our exteriors. They come and do comprehensive school site assessments, and they come walk each campus with us, with our teams, and make sure that we have our list of maintenance is well up to date, and we're addressing it as the needs come up so that we could prioritize appropriately. And in the securing the exterior campus, we also look at emergency notification systems and rapid access systems with our law enforcement and our first responders so they can access the campus. We have strong partnerships with our law enforcement in the sense that we have a PUSD tip line. It's I think it's, 844 PUSD tip. And that's a hotline that any of our community members can use if they hear something or see something. We definitely encourage them to come in and report it. It goes directly to our staff and our law enforcement to examine whether, the level of threat that's actually posing. We have also social, like I said, social, emotional, and health support services, and then all the training and preparedness. We work with the Dewey Cornell Threat Assessment System, and all of our staff have trained and up-to-date staff members that know how to do those comprehensive threat assessments. And even board members have been encouraged to take those threat assessment trainings, so we know what our staff are experiencing so that we can know the value and the benefit of that kind of system. And of course, we do restorative justice and anti-bullying training, and we have an MOU with Sandy Hook Promise on Starts With Hello. I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but that's also another excellent program. It's really a multi-pronged, comprehensive approach. We also know and appreciate that we can have the safest school on campus or in the United States, and it still might not be enough. So we communicate very closely with our staff, and we have a system where we can send text messages out to our community members.
Really appreciate that. As we talked about at the very beginning, the concept of school safety is so complex and covers so many domains that I think what you and Dr. Herman have already shared is the idea that this is not like a one and done document, a one and done conversation, and that it really touches the work of all people in the community. So, beyond just district office staff and site level staff, but, the families that you work with, the agencies that you're collaborating with. So I appreciate that perspective. One strategy that we found really intriguing, and in fact is a part of what led us to your invitation here today, was the work that Poway has done in developing a community-centered approach through these quarterly school safety summits. And I was hoping you might take a moment to describe what this process looks like, because I think there are a lot of people who are on today's Zoom who are hoping to hear about, what are some ways that they can take these conversations and translate them into a sense of community ownership of the issue and engagement so that their voices are heard, as well as, again, kind of acknowledging the broad spectrum of issues that touch school safety.
Yeah, so we're a district that is always working on continual improvement, right? We never take anything for granted. We're always looking for ways to do better and examining practices and processes we have in place. When we hired our new superintendent, or she's not new anymore, she's been around a while now, but when we hired her back in 2017, we started doing a comprehensive approach of things we can do better. And one of the things she did is we did a reorganization of our associate superintendent levels, and we added a position that was specifically student services. And that associate superintendent manages safety, counseling, as well as students with disabilities, because all of those areas are very complex and need very specific kind of knowledge and attention. And so we're fortunate that we're a large enough school district that we can do that and have a dedicated staff person to oversee all of those areas. And one of the benefits of that is in 2018, when we saw a significant increase in threats on school campuses, our campuses specifically in 2018, following the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas mass shooting, we experienced a lot of threats, lockdowns. Our staff decided we were going to start communicating more directly and openly with our community. We needed to have them as team members, because they're out in the community, they see and hear things. Social media was also being rapidly adopted by students, and they were using it more. And so parents could see things on social media that, you know, staff members may not be seeing. And so in 2018, we actually hosted our first large community forum on public safety and school safety and what we could do on campus. And from there, that kind of grew into this quarterly school site safety summits. And they are an excellent opportunity for us to highlight various aspects of school safety. And we have it as now, thanks to COVID pandemic, there are always silver linings. We're able to do it in a hybrid format. So we have them in the evenings, but we live stream them and then also have the video recording for family members to review if they weren't, you know, able to see it that night. But we do have an in-person attendance as well, and that makes for those personal connections and allows members to come in directly and ask questions and talk to experts that we've invited to our school campus, our district office. So for example, a series that we had in for the 2021-2022 school year, we had summits on regional safety concerns and trends, so things that we were seeing out in the community. And we had law enforcement as well as County Office of Ed come out and present that one. And then in January, we had a student wellness. That student wellness one got expanded in the following year to also include mental health wellness. So it wasn't just talking about we actually not just, you know, behaviors, but mental health as well. And that was a very important one. We actually had students on that panel, and one of the students, they talked about suicidal ideation, increasing anxiety, what it was like to go through that, the recovery process, and then the reintegration onto campus. And that helped lower the stigma that these students feel as they're going through this anxiety and depression. They heard it from their own peers and what that looked like as they returned back to campus and what they would recommend for their peers going forward. We've also had one most recently on substance abuse and addiction. And that one we actually had training on how to use the, oh, and now I'm blanking on the drug name, but the one,
Narcan.
Yeah, Narcan. So we had training for Narcan. And in that one, the interesting part about it was that we had community members that didn't even have students in school anymore that came back for that training. So it's a way to bring in community members, because whether you have students in school or not, you are part of the community, and it's part of creating a whole community safety environment. So we offered that opportunity to get Narcan training as well.
Right. And so again, this is something that is an invitation that is extended to students, the broader community. It sounds like you have a website or a page on the website that actually has, you know, all of the resources for that. And I just want to note that for those of you that are on today, if you're interested in learning more about that or even accessing some of the video archive of those conversations, that link will be included in the email that follows with the recording. So I wanted to share that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
As a board member, because you have an audience here that I think will have a large number of board members on this Zoom, do you have any thoughts for them about either lessons learned from Poway's efforts or perspectives about the board member role specifically?
Sure. So as board members, we actually are, most of us still have kids in the school district. So we're out and about a lot. We visit school sites. I have actually done some of the school site safety walks with Tim Ware in our San Diego County Office of Education. So I know firsthand what they're talking about and discussing. I have been, but prior to being a school board member, I was on our school site safety committee. So I know that work a little bit as well. It's important for board members to be engaged and know what's going on the school site. Of course, with the full knowledge of their superintendent, to collaborate and make sure that you're not just showing up on a campus unannounced, but you coordinate with the staff there and make sure that it's an appropriate time for you to be on campus. But yes, being involved, sharing it out on social media. We do that a lot. We make sure that whenever we have a school site safety summit, we are there present at those summits, and we're making sure that community members know that they are welcome by making sure that that invitation goes out far and wide. When we put out our invitations, they go directly to all through our Connect Ed system. It goes out to all of the families and the students in the system, but also then we push it out on social. We use social media a lot. So, and our school district website. So community members who are following it can come in and attend in person or watch virtually.
Great. Appreciate that. I noticed, there might be some folks in the audience right now who have questions or might want to add a comment. Notice that there is a Q&A portion at the bottom that you can add to, and we'll get to that question and answer either in writing or at the end when we have set aside some time for the live Q&A piece. All right. So one thing I want to comment also or ask about is, you mentioned the size of your district is pretty substantial. We probably have a fair number of districts represented on this call that might not have necessarily a staff member who is specifically devoted to the work that has supported these summits. But do you think that there are ways that smaller districts might be able to take components of what Poway is doing and apply them at their local level?
Sure. As president of the San Diego County School Boards Association, we have small districts and micro districts within our county. So we understand that the administrative level of support can be very limited in our small school districts. I think part of it is definitely making sure your physical school sites are secure with perimeter fencing and visitor management systems and cameras. Those things you could do passively without needing staff members necessarily to be they're present as a welcoming staff person as students come on campus, for example. But also just keeping open lines of communication with your community. That is a huge, huge part of it. We get tips all the time that come in and help us go in and do those threat assessments with law enforcement support if we need it. It's not always necessary. Usually our staff can kind of handle it on their own. But when we do need law enforcement, we have them at our side to work with us to go through whether this is a credible threat, whether the student actually has the means to conduct the act that they are planning to conduct. So, but it's really that strong relationship piece across the board with all of your different agencies in your in your community. It might be your religious, your places of worship that are your community members. It might be your Kiwanis Club or your Rotary Club or Chamber of Commerce, even that's your partner that's also got eyes and ears out there. But it really is a whole community collaborative piece.
Great. And I know that based on some conversations that we've had, Chief Paulino, I think this is a good moment to segue. So thank you, Dr. Patel, for sharing what Poway is doing and some of your perspective. So already today, we've heard about, the basics of comprehensive school planning and some of the ways that you might maximize it locally. And we've learned a little bit about how Poway is putting that into place, particularly with like a whole community approach. I know that one area San Bernardino has focused on is really intentional work around threat assessment and attention to active shooter prevention. What would you like governance teams to know about those aspects of school safety?
Mary, thank you. It's good to be with you as well as a team. I've learned so much. I'm a lot better having been a part of the conversation. And of course, in San Bernardino, we've had our share of experiences with violence on our elementary school as well as locally with the terrorist threat to our RRC center. So of course, there's a lot of learning from us. So those experiences, we put through that process we call an IRR, which is an after action review. So of course, what have occurred, what did we learn, and what was the next step in terms of making us better. So of course, in terms of our approach to this is a proactive approach. So of course, we look at our facilities in terms of how can we utilize technology as a force multiplier for us. This is across all our sites, over 83 sites across 109 square miles. We have cameras that comes to a central area, a central dispatch that's in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And of course, that's a huge investment on the part of the district to make sure that we're doing the things and to make sure that we paint the picture that we're vigilant about the safety of our students. And of course, you'll find from our experience things like single point entry in terms of our facilities. So we do our best to make sure that at a certain time, every school site go to single point entry where people have to announce themselves. And of course, go through what we is additional technology. Of course, for us, we utilize Raptor. Others may utilize another visitor management system. However, it allows our visitors to the school to announce themselves, and we can garner information on who's coming onto the school. And of course, then we have a system also where it's a camera system where our doors are secured. All doors are secured to the entrance, which is a result of our experience, knowing that if a person has to go be buzzed in, then it gives us time to be able to assess who's at the entrance and be able to give the staff some time to be able to evaluate whether that person should enter the campus or not. And of course, you know that we have a huge investment in terms of our security component, over 65 security officers across our system, and it supports our middle school as well as our high schools. And then of course, the district has its own police force, which is a primary law enforcement entity for our system. And of course, I know Tom touched on this. However, with the school safety plan, this holistic conversation in terms of a system that sparks a conversation. And for us, we have where it's a person responsible to make sure that the template is followed, even though that in the end, each school has to create a product that's unique to it in terms of their challenges. So we make it easy. However, we still check to make sure that it's being done properly. And of course, we do help. However, I think it's important to share with the governance team that our safety plans have to be approved by also by our public safety entities. And they have to be a part of the conversation to make sure that it's a product that they can respond to, that they're part of the conversation to make sure that it was produced. And of course, a big part of it for us in terms of the active shooter part is that training component. And there we have policy that drives the conversation for us, where we don't have to guess. The board have put forth a policy that helps us not have to guess on how do we do things around here.
Could you share a few policies that you think have been particularly helpful in providing clarity around those issues?
Well, yeah, one of the areas that I mentioned was single point entry, where all our sites will have single point entry. And the second area that a policy was created around was a fence line around elementary school, middle school, as well as high school, and how tall they're to be, which helps our facilities make that decision. And of course, one that is dear to my heart is how do we cite and arrest our students around here, right? In terms of how do we enforce the things that happens when our student run afoul of the law. Of course, we have policy 5144, which is clear in terms of things that we can arrest and cite for. And of course, for me, as a leader of the police force, I know that daytime curfew is one of those things. It's the precursor putting our students in the criminal justice system. So of course, we took that off the table. Small amount of marijuana, just these areas that we believe are detrimental to the criminal history of our students. So of course, Mary, our policy is written where you have to go out your way to be arrested by us, which I believe is a good thing in terms of not feeding that language where they say the school to prison pipeline, where we're mindful of our work and making sure that our kids have a bright future.
So I wonder, in terms of policies as well, you've spoken in the past about the importance of training. Do you want to speak a little bit about that? We've heard Dr. Patel talk about some of the training that they've done, de-escalation, anti-bias. What are some aspects that you think are really important in terms of supporting the training of people who either work with you in terms of the law enforcement component or the site administrator or teacher component?
I think training is important. We have to have a holistic, I believe this was mentioned earlier, where if you have a plan, then everybody needs to know the plan. And of course, it starts, I know when we spoke, Mary, I said that we have to have an informed community. I'm talking parents, students, our staff. They need to know what's expected of them. And if it was a crisis to occur, where the things that we've written in the training plan has to be utilized. And of course, the training plan is broad. However, it's this thing that the statement that I use, it's important that people know that it's just a guide, and they have to be creative about how we create safety in our systems. Of course, in my speaking, we have to give people permission and to make our communities a lot safer. Because if they believe that the safety plan is the only thing that does that, then we're losing it. We have to use the creativity of those around us, as well as the knowledge, skills, ability, to be able to drive this conversation for us. I like that saying from Mother Teresa, together we can do great things. Alone I can do one thing. So we have to make sure that we galvanize and recruit other people to it. However, training is key. Training is at the core of all that we do. We educate kids, so I believe that all that work around our kids should be educated. So training on all aspects in terms of threat assessments, CPI, any of these acronyms that we use in education.
I was going to say, what's CPI?
CPI is a component where we are able to restrain kids a certain way, which is an accountability. The acronym eludes me in terms of definition. However, I know what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, didn't mean to put you on the spot, but you spoke about threat assessment a little bit in your answer, and I think that there's something that would really be helpful for people to hear you discuss, and that is the distinction between threat assessment and profiling, and kind of the balance around those issues. Because I think, as people are thinking about what are some ways that we can avert incidents, particularly ones with a mass impact. You know, that the idea of threat assessment is very appealing, but that sometimes people might not understand the distinction between those two.
Well, yeah, definitely. And of course, Mary, you're talking a responsibility and accountability question in terms of making sure we're clear. Profiling it's not okay. And of course, and we know that profiling is utilizing information or weaponizing information to be able to target maybe certain specific groups or maybe certain person because of the information that we have on them. However, with an assessment, we know that it's behavior driven. Yes, that language is behavior driven. We don't care who you are. However, you have exhibited or stated a behavior that makes us concerned for our public safety or the system's safety. So of course, it would drive our work in terms of that accountability and responsibility we have to make sure that has been uttered, that has been brought to our attention, that we take accountability to make sure that it's not a probability that it may occur. And if it is, that we take action to make sure that we protect those that may have been threatened either electronically, physically, verbally, or in any form and that we may encounter in our system.
Great. So what other thing about your work in San Bernardino has been the Safe Schools Task Force? And I know that work goes back quite a long ways, so over a decade at this point. Could you share a little bit about that work and how it informs the work you're doing in terms of San Bernardino?
The thing the Safety Task Force has been a powerful conduit for us in terms of arriving at information that we wouldn't ordinarily have without that partnership. Some things Meredith has evolved from that powerful conversation is the way we utilize technology and the investment in the technology that we use as a force multiplier for us. Information in terms of the way we look at policies and the type of policies that we go after that allows for us to be able to lead conversation. However, it's policy driven, data driven. Prime example is, for instance, with the police force, every month it's an arrest and citation report that goes to the board. And of course, it's the data is segregated, special ed, male, female. You mentioned the geographics within our district is then broken down that way. So, and of course it informs our work. However, that comes from the Safe School Task Force. And
that gets a little bit at, giving an opportunity for conversations, for instance, around disproportionality. And I know that you've been trying to kind of break that school to prison pipeline. So.
And definitely, and to add to that, where we've reduced arrested citation by over 85% across the board in 10 years in our system. So we're like at about a little under 49,000 students in our district. And of course, everywhere is about 150 citations. And of course, those are the serious stuff in the penal code that we deal with in terms of making sure that we address or people are held accountable for certain behaviors that we know shouldn't be tolerated in our system. And of course, our camera system, which probably is one of the largest in the state in terms of our investment. It's like millions invested in our ability to be able to pull video from every site across our system. And I can even say we can do it with inside our police cars on the way to a scene or a site where we can pull up the video feed, a live video feed into our police cruisers.
Right. I have to ask, what are some things that you think might have contributed to the reduction in citations and arrests at such a dramatic rate?
You think the education piece and the programs that we've created that youths can be involved in. One of our positive ticket program is a great program where we go out our way to find kids doing the right things, and we make a big deal out of it. And of course, something that is dear to me is our Explore program, which is a 4-tier program, which is an Explore Auxiliary, found at our elementary school, Junior Explore at our middle school, and our Traditional Explore at our high school. Cadet program, which are local college kids, so kids that have matriculated all the way to college, they come back, and of course, a paid internship for them. And of course, our partnership with our local police academy, which we sponsor these kids to be police officers. So yeah, I'm real proud of our efforts in terms of feeding the career pathway system, right? Where kids can come to what I believe is a lab of learning, and they benefit from it. And in the end, their dreams come through, and to be young police officers for us in our community.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Chief Paulino. So I think at this point, we're going to transition to our conversation about such an integral component. And you've heard that Dr. Herman, Dr. Patel, and Chief Paulino have all addressed this in some way because the work is so integral. But I'd like to welcome Dr. Felix, professor from UC Santa Barbara, who is going to talk to us a little bit about the mental health components related to school safety. So one thing, before we dive in to some of the specifics, I think in the conversations around things like, let's say, active shooters or preventing mass attacks, this is one important and very troubling component of school safety concerns that people have. But I know that you have some thoughts and some evidence, obviously, related to some of the other factors that are really impactful in terms of school community. So if you want to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so part of my background, I am, in addition to being a professor, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I serve my community on our threat management team. And I've done a lot of work before becoming an expert in disaster mental health, both human caused like these mass shootings, as well as natural disasters. I spent a lot of time studying school bullying. So I didn't want to have this conversation without talking about the everyday impacts of peer victimization and school bullying that it has and takes a toll on our students. We know that it happens at every school, even with the best prevention efforts. And so having multi-tiered system of response and having all adults aware and trained of this so that any person that this kid reaches out to can help provide support and understanding, including their peers, can really reduce the mental health impact of this. And that has an impact on both suicide prevention. Obviously, that's something we've seen a connection to, but also when we've looked at these active shooter things, one of the things common is a buildup of stressors in people's lives. And when you're talking about children, school-age children, bullying is one of the stressors that can impact people's lives. And so making sure that school board members understand that it's really important to have strong evidence-based prevention of bullying, that it's not a one-shot and like what a multi-purpose room announcement, I'm trying to think of the word, but you need like a comprehensive social emotional health curricula that includes bullying prevention that's been studied and shown to work so that your investment of time, money, and resources will pay off.
Great, I appreciate that. And I think it's important, again, as we talked about, there's a big umbrella when we're talking about school safety, and we're not going to hit every point, but I think that it's one that anyone on this webinar today knows that those are factors that impact students within their local communities. One thing that we've been hearing in terms of preparation is the impact of drills, the safety drills and practices that districts may have developed as a part of their safety plans. We know that there are strong reasons for developing a sense of preparedness, but we also know that there have been some concerns about the impact, potential trauma associated with this, or stress related to these kinds of drills and plans. Was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, and I want to recognize there's a diversity of opinion on this, and also really give a little caveat in the sense that there's not a lot of systematic study of the impact of drills at all on the mental health of staff and students. So we're basically getting anecdotal evidence. So I'm going to give you my opinion as a psychologist who's been working in this field for 15, 20 years. And it's based on what I know about the stress response cycle and how that impacts risk for traumatic stress symptoms, other mental health problems. And we know that when things are unannounced, that it triggers a real stress response cycle. People do not know, like they're imagining their worst nightmare is happening at that moment, and they don't know that it's not truly happening. So my opinion, which is consistent with the California Department of Education, is that these should not be unannounced. There should be clear announcements before. People should practice emergency response for a variety of hazards, because obviously we're affected by natural disasters as well as human-caused incidents. When we are training for more of the human-caused ones, I also want to say I do not recommend graphic images as part of the training, because once you see these things, you can't get them out of your mind. And so that's appropriate for like first responders. They have chosen to be in this field and have that requisite training and support. But for teachers and staff and students who that would be too much. So not unannounced and not having graphic images. But of course, we do need to practice fire drills, earthquake drills, and what to do if something's happening in the community so that we could stay safe until we know what is happening. Not all the threats actually emerge into something, thank goodness, into something that is actually happening at the school, but we have to be prepared.
Are there any thoughts that you might have in terms of developmental differences, for instance, in terms of like what those drills and practices might look like at the K2 level versus at the secondary level? Are there any considerations that might be related to developmental appropriateness?
Yes, we definitely have to tailor how we do it and the language that we use to be developmentally appropriate for whatever age range that we are doing this. Obviously, when kids get older, junior high, high school, they know exactly what you're talking about and why we're doing this, but we want to preserve the innocence of our young kids as much as we can. And they sometimes they have magical thinking about what these threats can be. And so we want to be really clear about how to say factual information and only saying facts when we know them in a way that a child would understand. I know at one school district here, when they were practicing or they had an actual lockdown, the teacher was trying to figure out what to say to the students, and they were young students, and they didn't know what was happening, and the kid thought a lion escaped from the zoo. And so there are things like that where you want to provide, we don't know, we're waiting to hear what it is, and try to provide factual information in a way that your kids speak.
Great, thank you. We've also been hearing about an increase in incidents of social media threats or swatting incidents, which we haven't discussed yet at this point today. What are some ways that school safety threats affect students and staff mental health?
Yes, I did not know the term swatting. I just always talked about them as hoaxes until I saw your question. So I've learned some new lingo today on that. So we know that, unfortunately, that there are more hoax threats following when one of these incidences make the news. So since the Nashville school shooting just happened, I expect that schools across the country are contending with more hoax threats. Perceived incidents can be as impactful as real. So these hoax have really temporary I mean, once we are done, and it takes a few days and weeks for our stress reactions to go, but it triggers a real stress response cycle in people because we don't know that. And so in the aftermath, schools are going to understandably be possibly contending with more student emotional and behavioral concerns as they work out their stress related to having this hoax or this lockdown, a lockdown because of a hoax. And as well as staff, because it puts up the fear of their worst nightmare happening. And so just having extra supports and understanding and grace for one another in the weeks that follow as people do that. And hopefully we can find better ways to prevent this. This is not good to make these kinds of hoax threats.
So whether or not it's a hoax threat or an incident has actually happened, what are some signs that students and staff may exhibit after a traumatic event?
Yeah, and so regardless of whether we're talking about these active shooter events, that there's a variety, kids are coming to school with traumatic experiences. We know up to 2/3 of kids by the time they graduate high school have had at least one adverse childhood experience. And so being well-versed in trauma-informed practices as a school system is critical for serving all your students, not just in the aftermath of these kinds of dramatic tragedies. And so there can be a variety of physical, cognitive, social, emotional, and learning impacts, as well as on language and communication of experiencing traumatic stress, regardless of what the origin is. So physical, kids will come, we often can express stress and anxiety through headaches and stomach aches. So those kind of physical somatic complaints, so you can see increased number of those. Sometimes increased fidgeting, getting out of seats, activity level. Other kids, their reaction of stress will be to withdraw and turn inward more. Cognitive, so people might recreate the traumatic event, so that can be seen through their play or repeatedly talking about it, or on the other hand, avoiding anything that reminds them of that, and then that starts constricting their life and their ability to engage in the whole school environment. You can have difficulties with impulse control, problems with attention, which we know impacts learning, worry, fear. You can have everything from emotional numbness to like more anger, irritability, outburst. It can affect language development. There can be more absenteeism. So I can keep going. I'm just trying to touch across all those domains, but it really does impact learning. And so schools having multi-tiered systems of support for social emotional health is critical, given the range of adverse childhood experiences kids are coming with, and then being informed about trauma-informed practices, I think, are critical to help mitigate the impacts of these events on their learning and achievement.
Great. So are there specific steps that you can suggest to school districts, administrators, to reduce the negative consequences and assist recovery?
Yes, so I'm going to just keep saying about having the baseline, how your school is doing before a crisis event happen is going to be critical to the resiliency and recovery of your community in the aftermath. So having robust multi-tiered system of support with evidence-based programming on social emotional health. I also suggest having training in trauma-informed practices for administrators, everybody, administrator, staff, bus drivers, teachers, so that when kids are coming to you and you're seeing that litany of symptoms I just gave about the impact of trauma, you're not saying what's wrong with the child, you're saying what's happened to this child and looking at it with that compassionate lens. I also, given my role in crisis response, really recommend schools, staff being trained in psychological first aid for school. It's a little different than the mental health first aid. This is more of a disaster specific one, so hence it's a little different. I know there's mental health first aid out there, And that will give you like the do's and don'ts of what to do in the immediate aftermath of either a natural disaster or a school crisis event. So what it is appropriate for teachers to talk about in class, what it's not appropriate to do. I think any mental health volunteers, you need to have them trained in psychological first aid and crisis counseling models, because we know that in the aftermath of these events, there is a lot of understandable reactions to extraordinary events, and we don't want to pathologize that, because most people, with or without a mental health counselor, will be resilient or recover following these things. We are made to adapt and heal, and our power to do it. We have an innate great power to do that. And so you want to support the natural healing mechanisms that people have, such as accessing social support, maintaining good health habits. And so you want to make sure any mental health volunteer you have is trained in this kind of crisis approach, which is different than a therapy approach. I can spend a lot more time talking about all of this. If you want me to go in more depth on this, I have a whole hour I can do presentations on this. So
I think we have an idea for a future webinar. I do want to share with those on today's Zoom that we recently did a webinar on trauma-informed education that I think touches on a lot of the points that you've just raised. So I would love to, kind of refer people to that as one kind of introductory thing for board members. And speaking of board members and governance teams, any final recommendations that you have for governance teams as they consider ways that they can support school safety and student and staff mental health?
Yes, I wanted to make some reference to some resources that I love to give people and that I give teachers in our own community when we do these trauma-informed practices training. One resource is the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And so they were specifically funded. They were funded on September 11th, 2001, to help create an evidence-based, evidence-informed framework supporting kids recovering from traumatic events. So you can find a wealth of free, multilingual, downloadable handouts, free, and they are really high quality stuff. So you can find trainings on any area you'd want to know. You can find that psychological first aid trainings free online. There's ones for schools. And so having more people trained in these kinds of approaches is critical. And then I also like to leave board members, schools, when I do these talks, with knowing that what you do just as a teacher, a board member, is really critical for helping the mental health of kids in the aftermath of crisis events. What we know from studying the impact of disasters on children is that beyond how their parents are doing and beyond what they were exposed to in that event, one of the most critical factors in their mental health recovery is schools reopening and creating that sense of normalcy and routine and being able to connect with teachers and their peers and all of that. And so even if you are affected by these events yourselves and don't have anything else to give, just you doing your job of making sure that you're creating a safe, supportive school will help in reopening them as soon as possible.
Great. So I want to thank all of our panelists for the conversation that we've had thus far, and really a tremendous amount of information has been shared. Now I think we're going to transition to some of the questions that our audience have asked. I know that there have been some questions that have already been answered within the Q&A section. This question is for you, Tom, to clarify a point that I may have made inadvertently. There is a comment here. Is the date of March 1st the date by which school sites must have adopted the plan and then forwarded on to the district for approval, or does it need to be transmitted by the March 1st date?
No, the first. It's the date by which it must be developed. And
Great.
so what we recommend is there not be a large space between the time it's developed and then adopted, because then it can be sort of not attended to, and now you're approaching the October date in which it must be reported that you've not received one. So we recommend it be done right away. There's nothing in education code that really speaks to the issue of, well, when was it adopted? We know that if it's not by October, you're going to be sort of turned in, so to speak, but what date does it actually have to be? Well, the answer is prior to October. So we really want to make it sort of right away, have it be a kind of flow from the development of it to its subsequent adoption.
We did have a related question, which was whether or not that March 1st deadline is related to a plan for that current school year or a plan for the coming school year.
Yeah, this is a great question for which the education code is silent on this. So what we're recommending is that it can be either. Once you in your own cycle, you will then essentially decide, because you're doing it every year. So is this the one going to be for the upcoming year, or is this current year? So if you've not done it previously, then decide and sort of be consistent with that. So the answer is really the education code is silent on whether the actual year they're referring to. But clearly it has to be done yearly and updated as many times as is needed.
Great, appreciate the clarification. This question is a really thought-provoking one, and I know that we might have one or two people who might be able to chime in on this one. Can you speak to and provide resources or information on how to create safety and evacuation plans for students with disabilities, both those with mobility disabilities and those with developmental disabilities, or perhaps intellectual disabilities? These students may not be able to evacuate quickly in a fire, earthquake, or human-caused emergency, and may need some adult support in understanding what is happening within the moment. So is there anyone who can kind of speak a little bit to plans that might be developed around that, or where they might find guidance?
I can a little, but Tom, did you want to go?
No, go ahead. I may say
Maybe
something
we'll
after.
all jump in on this one, because you cannot spend enough time and attention on this. And so first we want to make sure, I would suggest having like both students and parents with disabilities themselves involved in your emergency planning. And it needs to be individualized for that student, because every student has different needs about what their plan should be. And they definitely have to be included in all your preparation for this, because you can't leave them behind. But that's what some people have experienced. I've read several news reports where this wasn't with the K through 12 schools, but with other things, where they were told a plan like for a fire drill to wait to be rescued, and then people went by them. And so we don't do general as a society well enough on making sure that we're including people with disabilities in the emergency planning and making sure that it fits for them. Now, there has been some resources developed, and I'll pull the exact name, but a parent who lost a child at Sandy Hook Elementary, it was a student with disabilities, has really made it her mission to help schools be prepared for this. And so she has a program out, and I have links to it that I will find and give to Angela and Mary so that it can go out in the resources. And so I think that would be a great concrete tool for board members to know about.
Greatly appreciate that. Tom, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that's a great response to the question. That it is an education code that you have to account for the students with disabilities, and it really can be made part of an IEP. So two things: having a person involved in the safety committee that has some expertise in special education, that's a great start. And then also for particular students, they can have this actually in an IEP. So should something happen on campus, how will we assist this individual in terms of it? Maybe something as simple as exiting a building, or so that student does not get left behind.
Chief Paulino, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, definitely. And of course, you have the Red Cross, which has resources that we can pull from in terms of literature, as well as equipment that we may need to purchase and to be able to assist. It's like, for instance, years ago, we had an interesting situation on the second floor. However, the gurney couldn't fit within the elevator. So, of course, we didn't have the equipment to be able to carry the person down the stairs. So we had to be creative about how we do it. Of course, the Center for Disease also has an area on their website that can help with this conversation as well. And then the last area is FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, has an area that addresses this as well.
Great, appreciate that. And I think Dr. Patel, you had a brief comment as well.
Sure. Yes, I agree with Dr. Felix that they really do have to be customized to the disability. And so it has to be on an individual student level. We do have a wish list. There are PA systems. If we could get a bond passed, we would upgrade our PA systems so that we could use flashing light or some other alternative method for our students that are deaf and hard of hearing, and to help with our students that have sensory processing issues so that the sound isn't always so loud, or if they do wear ear covers in case of a drill, that they can also participate in the drill through other types of senses. So there are things that can be done, and really family members being on that school site safety plan, family members, parents with students with disabilities, we should really make a concerted effort to include those parents on those school site safety plans. And if that means actively recruiting on, the principal actively going out and recruiting parents, that's part of the system. We have to do that. We also work closely with our CAC to make sure that we have cross communication in those forums as well. And then
Just
the
to
last,
clarify, sorry, CAC means?
the Community Committee for Disabilities.
Great, thank you.
The oversight committee, and we're a single district SELPA, so we have a little bit more control over that. But if it is within, if your SELPA is a multi-district SELPA, you can still work with that SELPA to help parents get informed about the drills and what your students might need in those processes. And then additionally, one thing that we've had on our minds for a long time is our substitutes. We have a large turnover in instructional assistants within our classrooms, as well as even the regular routine turnover with other staff members. So we try to make sure whenever possible that our substitutes are also brought up to date on evacuation plans, and they're included in the training. We're working on that. And that they know what that evacuation may look like if they are a substitute instructional assistant, and they have those responsibilities as well.
Right. So there is an additional question. Are there any updates as to the most effective approach for a multi-casualty event, such as an active shooter? The person who posed the question noted that they had recently attended a national safety webinar, and it seems like those agencies on the webinar preferred run, hide, fight. Here in California, with many open concept schools, that seems to be a good approach. What are the panel's thoughts on that? And if that is what is recommended, how do we best prepare and inform elementary age students for the running part of this without creating emotional trauma?
I think this is a difficult question, and it really has to speak to the needs of and the culture of the local schools and school district. But certainly, run, hide, fight is a sort of a reasonable response, for example, to gunfire. Now, how you build this into a plan where you sort of practice it is very difficult. So in a very realistic way, the origin of the gunfire might be, what if it's right near you, but your practice is to go to this room that's nearby, that's closest, but yet the gunfire is in that direction. So kids would be taught to go away from the direction and then understand the ways in which they can hide. And then ultimately, as that very last resort, depending on what's age appropriate, that issue of fighting or distracting or getting other students together to, fight someone who is causing, great harm. So it's something that is, there is training in it. I've been involved in the last, I think, 3 regional trainings with the FBI and other agencies that are looking at that, looking at the issue of how to respond to these active assailants.
Appreciate that. Dr. Felix.
Yes, I appreciate everything Tom has said, but I also just want to talk about run, hide, fight. Like, it's a reasonable approach, but we know that it's not going to be available to all of our community members because of disability issues. So thinking about somebody with a mobility disability in a wheelchair, they can't run or outrun it, they can't hide in such a big piece of equipment, and they can't fight. And so we do need to spend more time as a community thinking around alternatives to that. I don't know that we have a ton yet to offer. So I'm just going to, at least that I'm aware of, maybe somebody on here can educate me, but I do think we need to spend time thinking that through, as well as how to do this age appropriate ways, and in recognizing that when our stress system is flooded with cortisol, we're going to do what makes instinctual best. It takes a lot of training to override our natural stress response and to do whatever we need to do. And so I think people will run in a variety of directions. I think just having 3 words makes sense, and it will work for a lot of people in our community that they can keep in mind when stress is surging. But yes, even when you practice something, our human stress response cycle will just have us go wherever we think is going to work, to be honest.
Appreciate that, Dr. Felix. Chief Paulino.
Yeah, I think depends on where you go in terms of the part of the country. And you'll find I Love You, you'll find the FEMA way, the Homeland Security way. Yeah, however, it all centers around these 3 things. However, I'll add one to it. 2 things. We need to give our team permission to survive. And how we do that is to make sure that we unleash their creativity. How creative you are about your survival. We make sure that we engage them in that conversation, like Dr. Felix says, where we look at the entire community. What would we do if somebody in a wheelchair was involved in this incident? So we have to be creative about making sure that everybody's involved in the conversation. However, whatever I believe a system chooses to do, it needs to be practiced. Of course, we want to keep people informed, not paralyzed. This is how we are attempting what they say, and just trying, we arrive at success. So we know that when these things happen, it creates them excite delirium. So it's important that we're able to have an informed conversation where people aren't left paralyzed, that they're left informed.
Appreciate that. Dr. Patel and Chief Paulino, I have a question about something in terms of practice that the chief just mentioned. We've heard about districts that use tabletop exercises, for example, where they collaborate with different districts and site and law enforcement or first responder groups in kind of practicing the organizational response. Do either of your districts use tabletop exercises as part of their preparation plan, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know specifically if they're called tabletop plans. I haven't participated in one, but I do know that we work closely with all of our agencies to make sure that we know what our plans are going to be. whether it's specific like around a lockdown or active shooter, or whether it's something like an evacuation due to a natural disaster. We do work closely. And in San Diego County, we're very fortunate that our first responders work really, really well together. We are known for that. And so we are able to leverage that and take advantage of our various agencies and making sure that we're coordinated in our responses and we keep open lines of communication. But tabletop, I'm not very familiar with that process.
Great.
Maybe Chief Polino, you can speak to that.
Yeah, definitely, Dr. Patel. Yeah, tabletops, I believe, is a powerful tool, and it can test a variety of things from our ability to put out communication on an incident. How would we respond? Where it's a dialogue versus the interactive, where it's the kinetic energy and whatever may be occurring. So yeah, in our system, we utilize it. We utilize it well. I did a tabletop just yesterday in terms of active shooter at a charter school in the desert. Helped them walk through that. And the reason that we would want to choose any of these specific areas in terms of running, hiding, fighting, and of course, the conversation is where we go through that learning process. And I think it's beneficial to all. So if you're not utilizing tabletops, I think it's a good approach to be able to get some experience as well as some training.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one brief and maybe one more answer in addition to that. First of all, Dr. Herman, one question around what happens if a district does not get their plan approved on time, or plans, depending on the school sites. Could you speak to that briefly? Oh, you're muted.
Sure. We will communicate with that district to inquire what are their needs, or what's sort of preventing them from getting those plans in. And as a last sort of resort, this has not happened since I've been around, but if the superintendent of public instruction determines that there's been willful failure to make to turn in plans, then they can actually be fined, and that fine would be no less than, no more than $2,000, and could impact the future funding for that school. So, but first, far and away, schools who have not turned in a plan is owing to sort of staff issues or an unfamiliarity with it or new people, and we're happy to reach out to those districts that are struggling.
Great. One point on the requirements, I believe, is that they be posted, or available, publicly available for review, but that you do not have to have tactical information that is sensitive and might be compromise those safety plans. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, so the final question before we thank our panelists and let everyone resume their day is, Dr. Herman, if you could elaborate, you mentioned priority 6, which is, the California state priorities for the LCAP and LCFF. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? And do you have any thoughts on adopting plans on the consent agenda, if that's something that should be kind of up for discussion?
Well, I think that may be up for discussion, but the LCAP generally it requires board approval for the LCAP, and so the priority 6 is really requires that the schools survey their students, and so that is just a great source of information. With regard to the suspension and expulsion sort of rates at their school, that's always a great discussion to have. And I'm really sort of heartened to hear mention always of the ways in which we at times can contribute to the school to prison pipeline if we're not careful, and if we criminalize sorts of behaviors that others might see as a continuum of normative adolescent behavior. and that we criminalize that to the detriment of groups. And so that's just very difficult, and I think something that schools can attend to.
Great, I appreciate that. We have one final slide that I think that our comms team is going to share, which provides an email for folks. If you have questions that either weren't addressed today or that arise following this, you are welcome to email us at research@csba.org. That will get to our team, and we will gladly forward along any inquiries to the relevant panelists if that is something that is relevant to the panelists. Also want to share that we have a couple of additional resources. The CDE has quite an extensive set of resources available on their website related to comprehensive school safety planning, compliance guidance, best practices, and so on. And we also have at CSBA a series of web pages that are linked to our safe and supportive school environments resources. So appreciate our panel today. I want to thank Dr. Herman, Dr. Patel, Chief Paulino, and Dr. Felix for really wide-ranging discussion. We hit a lot in 90 minutes. I know it wasn't everything, but I think that we really covered a lot of good ground, and so appreciate your time and appreciate everyone's time in joining us this afternoon. Thank you, everyone.